Hi, I'm Dr. Walter Matwychuk, and I'm here to talk to you a little bit about the ABCs of effective self-therapy. In rational motor behavior therapy, we encourage you to become your own therapist and periodically take time to think about your thinking when you're emotionally upset, whether that be about something in the past or in the present or in the future. We've come up with self-help worksheets that people don't use. So I've been trying to figure out why that is. I think it's probably because they insist on doing these things perfectly well, and also because they have low discomfort tolerance. They just find them too hard to do. So one of the things that I've thought about is whether it would be easier if people just wrote the letters A, B, C, D, E, F on a piece of paper. It might be less intimidating, so your perfectionism wouldn't get in the way. Now, what I'd like to do is go over what each one of these letters stand for, because I found when I talk to somebody who thinks they know REBT and they've been with it for a while, they very often don't get these letters correct. And if you don't know what the letters stand for, you can't do effective self-therapy. A stands for adversity. And adversity is a negative state of affairs. That negative state of affairs may be in the future or in the past, or can be actually occurring in the present. Now, it's very important to make a distinction between what we call the situational adversity and the critical adversity, which is often an inference. Let me explain. If you find yourself thinking about a problem, and a problem, say, that may happen tomorrow, you may have a job interview. The situational adversity is a simple description of what is happening. So you might see yourself walking around, having a certain kind of expression on your face, and you may even say out loud, "Oh, I'm not going to do so well tomorrow," or you maybe say that to another person. The situational adversity is just a description. What's really important is for you to ferret out, identify what we call the critical adversity. And the critical adversity is the most distressing aspect of the adversity. So if a person's going to have a job interview tomorrow, they may have a hunch that they're not going to perform well. That statement, "I will not do well, I'll make a fool of myself," that inference, that hunch, is what we call the critical inference. And it's very important when you try to do self-therapy that you identify the critical inference. You can't just write job interview. You really need to ask yourself, what is it about the job interview tomorrow that I may find particularly distressing? Well, I may answer a question wrongly about my past job employment record, and that then leads me to look foolish and ultimately not get the job. So the question becomes, what is the critical inference? Is it looking foolish, or is it not getting the job offer? And so the way you could determine if you've identified the critical inference is by saying to yourself, well, if I reassure myself that I'm not going to look foolish, does my anxiety go away? Or if I reassure myself that no matter what happens, I get the job, no matter how I perform, I get the job, does my anxiety go away? So it's very important for you to ask yourself, what's the most distressing aspect of the adversity I'm going to experience? And then use that as the adversity that starts your self-therapy analysis. The critical inference is critical. If you're thinking about something in the past, you could ask yourself, what was the most distressing aspect of that past conversation? Well, or that past event. It wasn't that I lost the game so much as I lost the game and I played poorly. So you always want to identify the aspect of the situation that you're most distressed about. That's very important. Why is it important? Because when you go to point B, your basic attitude, you'll create your basic attitude with the critical inference in mind. Now, before we discuss point B, basic attitude, let's talk about emotional and behavioral consequences. In rational emotive behavior therapy, we argue that adversity in and of itself is insufficient to create emotional disturbance at point C. What we need to do is identify the basic attitudes at point B that lead to our emotional upset and our self-defeating at point C. Point C stands for emotional and behavioral consequences. These are emotions like anxiety, and then the behavioral expression of that anxiety would be procrastination or avoidance. If you are angry at point C, you may then be aggressive, or you may opt for being passive aggressive. But the point being is your behavior would be associated with your anger. If you're shameful, that's an emotion at point C that we would want you to do self-therapy with. What do people do when they're shameful? They hide. They go into the shadows. They go into the closet, if you will, with the behavior. They hide. So emotional consequences are at point C. Now, point B is where the money is. That is where you put your rigid and extreme attitudes. So B stands for basic attitudes. We used to call these things beliefs, but really the best way to describe the kinds of thoughts that go at point B is to call them basic attitudes, because they're at the base of your emotional disturbance. There are 3 basic attitudes. I have to do well. 2, you have to treat me nicely. And 3, the world has to be easy and not give me undue burdens. And then there are 3 derivative attitudes that the theory says derives from these 3 musts. One is it's awful, which is an extreme rating of how bad something is. It's unbearable, which is an attitude of intolerance. I can't stand it. And 3, self-devaluation. I'm a loser. Other devaluation. You're a loser. And or life is totally bad. And in this devaluation derivative attitude, you are focusing on a bad part and then devaluing the whole of yourself, others, or life. Now, once you've identified your rigid attitude, for example, I have to do perfectly well, and then this derivative, if I don't do perfectly well, that would make me a loser. You then go to point D, disputing. Disputing is the word we use for the self-reflective process of asking questions, trying to challenge the validity, the function of your basic attitude at point B. Now, you can ask questions like, would I teach this attitude that I have to do perfectly well and then think of myself as a loser if I don't? Would I teach that to a child? The answer would be, of course I wouldn't teach that to a child. It's the teacher-child dispute which is probably the easiest dispute for people to learn. Now, the classic dispute that Ellis used to use, the originator of REBT, was the dispute, where's the evidence? Where you call for evidence. When you ask yourself, where's the evidence that I have to perform perfectly well? If you think carefully, you will see there's 0 evidence that you have to perform perfectly well. Now, there's lots of evidence you want to perform well, but there's 0 evidence that you absolutely have to perform well. And it's very important that you see that point. Now, the third dispute would be something along the lines of, well, does my attitude impair me in any way? Is it functionally impairing? If I think to myself, I have to do perfectly well, and I'm a loser if I don't do perfectly well. The answer would be, of course it's functionally impairing, because what happens when I tell myself I have to do perfectly well? I make myself anxious. And after I have done poorly or less than ideally, I make myself depressed by telling myself I'm a loser. So both of those attitudes will lead to functionally poor performance. And then the final dispute you could use is what we call the logical dispute. It's probably the most difficult one to convey to people, but essentially it's where you go from a premise illogically to a conclusion. So for example, if I said, well, because I want to do well, therefore I have to do well, or because there are advantages to me doing well, therefore I have to do well, the logical dispute would say, is the conclusion I have to do well, does that logically follow from the premise I want to do well? And of course the answer is it doesn't logically follow. You may want to do well, but that doesn't mean or translate or logically lead to, therefore I absolutely have to do well. Now, once you've done this reflective thought, the next step is to go to point E. E stands for effective new philosophy. And that's where you take your basic attitude after you have questioned it and you create an alternative attitude that's flexible and non-extreme. So the disputing process hopefully will loosen your grip on this demand that I have to do well and help you see that an effective new philosophy would be, I want to do well, and there are many advantages to doing well. That's why I want to do well. But I do not absolutely have to do so. It doesn't follow that I have to do so. So I want to do well, but it doesn't follow that I absolutely have to do well. Second idea, that would be that's a flexible attitude about performance and performing less than ideally. And then the derivative attitude that would follow would be, when I don't do well as I desire, my performance will be bad, but it doesn't mean that I am a loser, a failure, a bad person, a worthless person. In other words, I am a fallible human who this time acted badly, but we don't know how I'll do tomorrow. In fact, very often when we do poorly today, we increase the probability of doing better tomorrow. That's called rehearsal. Actors know that. That's why we rehearse. Athletes know that. That's why we practice. If you look at one of my early videos, you'll probably see me not speak as well as I am today. Why? Because I've made a lot of videos, and in each one I practice. So you want to create a new effective attitude at point E, and this is the attitude that we're really striving to adopt and make our own, which in this case would be, I want to do well, but I don't absolutely have to. And when I do poorly, that's bad, but the whole of me isn't bad. I'm not a failure. I'm not a loser. I just lost today. I just performed poorly today. And finally, we want to go to F, functional new behavior. Now, it's very important that REBT not be just an intellectual exercise. What we want in rational emotive behavior therapy is for people to help themselves therapeutically by not only creating a new effective attitude, but then to behave in a functional way that's consistent with that new attitude. And it's when we behave in a functionally new way that we really develop conviction in our effective new attitude. Now, in this instance, a functional new behavior would be risking doing poorly. I know people who shy away from taking calculated risks. Why? Because their anxiety at point C over the possibility of doing badly and possessing the attitude, I have to perform perfectly well, leads them to feel lots of anxiety, and then they retreat, they withdraw. Now, after they dispute and see that they don't have to do perfectly well at point A, because they have the attitude, I want to do well, but don't have to, they have a new attitude. That new attitude's great. It's in their head, but they have to live in harmony with it. So I tell them to think of the functional behavior that goes along with that new attitude. So let's assume you are going out for a play. You would like to try out for a part in community theater or in your school theater, but you're afraid of auditioning. Well, the functional new behavior that would go along with, I don't have to do perfectly well when I go out for the play, would be that you literally go and audition. So we want you in REBT to get out of your comfort zone and act functionally in a way that's consistent with your new effective philosophy. Now, I'm telling you, if you really want to grow, you need to do your ABC analysis and do the D, E, and F part of it in order to do effective psychotherapy on yourself. We want you in REBT to learn how to help yourself. It's a problem-focused. The problem is at A and at C because there's self-defeating behavior and unhealthy emotions, and then there are difficult circumstances. It's a problem-focused, solution-oriented, philosophical approach. So it's both a therapy and a philosophy. I hope that you will listen to my audio, this video, again and again until you really understand what these components are, that you read the piece that corresponds to today's video, because that too will go beyond this video and reinforce these ideas. But 3, that the next time you're troubling yourself about something, that you take out a piece of paper and that you literally write down A, B, C, D, E, F and try to do self-therapy. So let's assume that, for example, you're upset about a conversation you had in the past. You could do an ABC analysis so that you have a healthy sadness about that past conversation. Or let's assume that you're asking someone out for a date and you're waiting, you imagine yourself anxious while you await the answer. You could say at point A, they may reject me, feel anxious at point C, and identify the attitude at point B. It would be awful. I must not get rejected. And it would be awful if they were to reject me. And then do your ABC's analysis of that. Or let's assume there's an event tomorrow that you're not sure is going to go in your favor. Again, you could develop a healthy concern that you may do poorly tomorrow by identifying the attitude that would make you anxious instead of concerned and then disputing it. Where's the evidence that I have to perform perfectly well? Would I tell a kid to think that way, or would I tell them to try their best and let the chips fall where they may? That's what my father used to teach me. Try your best, let the chips fall where they may. That is part of your new effective philosophy. I want to perform well tomorrow, but I don't have to. I'll try my best, and whatever happens, happens. And then I'm going to show up tomorrow and do and face whatever challenges I face, whether it be on the ball field, in the classroom, at the dance, wherever, during the job interview, and I'm going to try my best. So I hope that you go over this video. I think it's one of the more important ones that I've made so far, because I really believe that people need to learn how to do self-therapy, and writing their thoughts down rather than doing it in their head. This is really very important to do. Don't be lazy. Take out a piece of paper or use one of my self-help sheets, but that may be too complicated. You may do better doing it this way. Experiment. I hope to see you on Saturday when I hold a conversation with a volunteer and teach them how to go through the ABC analysis and DEF part of it with a problem that they're willing to discuss in a public setting. I do it on Zoom. It's every Saturday at 9 a.m. It's free to attend. Please write to me at rebtdoctor@gmail.com and I'll send you the link. See you on Saturday and do your ABCs.